Stop everything you're doing right now. Close your laptop, put your phone on silent, lock the door to your room, because what I am about to tell you in the next 30 minutes will fundamentally alter the way you see the global financial system. It is Tuesday, January 21st, 2026, and while you were scrolling through social media while you were watching the stock market hit new highs, while the mainstream media was feeding you stories about economic recovery, something catastrophic just happened on the other side of the planet. Something that the central banks have been desperately trying to prevent for the last 15 years. Something that, once it starts, cannot be stopped. We are talking about Japan. We are talking about the third largest economy in the world. We are talking about a nation that holds over $1.1 trillion in United States Treasury bonds. And as of 72 hours ago, they have made a decision that is going to send shockwaves through every stock market, every bond market, every currency on this planet. The Bank of Japan has just fired the first shot in what I am calling the Great Unraveling. And you have probably not heard a single word about it on CNBC. You have not heard a single word about it from your financial advisor, because they do not want you to know. They do not want you to understand what is coming, because if you understood, you would panic, you would run, you would do exactly what the smart money is already doing right now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Asian Guy, and today we are going to dissect the corpse of the Japanese economy. We are going to expose the lie that has been holding the global financial system together for 3 decades. We are going to show you why Japan's latest move is not just another policy adjustment. It is the detonation of a financial nuclear weapon. And the fallout is going to hit your bank account, your retirement fund, your savings, everything you have worked for in the next 6 to 9 months. Here is what you need to understand before we go any further. Japan is not just another country. Japan is the keystone. Japan is the load-bearing wall that has been holding up the entire architecture of global debt. For the last 20 years, Japan has been the world's largest creditor nation. They have been lending money to everyone. The United States government, European nations, corporations, emerging markets, Japanese banks and pension funds have been the ones buying the bonds that nobody else wanted to buy. They have been the ones keeping interest rates artificially low across the entire planet. They have been the lender of last resort for the global Ponzi scheme. And now they are walking away from the table. On January 18th, 2026, the Bank of Japan released a statement that most people skimmed over in 5 seconds. Most analysts dismissed it as technical jargon. But buried inside that statement was a single sentence that should terrify anyone who understands how the international bond market actually works. The Bank of Japan announced that they are officially pivoting away from their yield curve control policy. They announced that they are going to allow Japanese government bond yields to rise freely. They announced that they are done with artificially suppressing interest rates. Now, if you do not understand what that means, let me translate it into plain English. For decades, Japan has been printing money to buy their own government bonds. They have been doing this to keep interest rates at zero. They have been doing this so that the Japanese government can borrow unlimited amounts of money for free. But more importantly, they have been doing this to keep the yen weak. A weak yen means Japanese exports are cheap. A weak yen means Toyota and Sony can dominate global markets. A weak yen means Japan stays competitive. But there is a cost. The cost is inflation. The cost is a bond market that is completely fake. The cost is a currency that has been slowly dying for 30 years. And now, the music has stopped. The Bank of Japan has decided that they can no longer afford to keep playing this game. Why? Because the inflation inside Japan has gotten out of control. Because the Japanese people are rioting in the streets over the cost of food. Because the yen has collapsed so violently over the last 3 years that it takes 158 yen to buy one single US dollar. The currency has lost 40% of its value since 2021. 40%. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your life savings can now only buy 60% of what it could buy 3 years ago. That is what has happened to the average Japanese citizen. And the government has finally been forced to admit that they have a problem. So they made the decision. They are going to stop printing money to suppress interest rates. They're going to let the market decide what Japanese government bonds are actually worth. And here's the problem. The market has already decided. And the answer is terrifying. As of this morning, the yield on the 10-year Japanese government bond has spiked to 1.8%. Now, to most people, 1.8% sounds like nothing. You're probably thinking, wait, that is lower than what I can get in a savings account in America. You're missing the point. The point is not the absolute number. The point is the direction. The point is the velocity. Japanese bond yields have been at zero for 20 years. They have been negative for large portions of the last decade. And now, in the span of 6 months, they have gone from negative 0.1% to positive 1.8%. That is a 2% move in a bond market that is supposed to be the most stable, most boring, most predictable market in the entire world. A 2% move in Japanese bonds is the equivalent of an earthquake. And the aftershocks are going to be felt everywhere, because here's what happens next. Japanese pension funds, Japanese insurance companies, Japanese banks have been the largest buyers of United States Treasury bonds for the last 20 years. They have been buying our debt because their own government bonds paid nothing. They had no choice. They had to go overseas to find yield. But now they can get 1.8% at home. They can get a return in their own currency without taking any foreign exchange risk. So what do you think they are going to do? They are going to stop buying US Treasuries. They are going to start selling US Treasuries. They are going to repatriate their capital back to Japan. And when Japan stops buying our bonds, when Japan starts selling our bonds, the entire foundation of American deficit spending collapses. Let me show you the numbers so you understand the scale of the disaster we are facing. Japan currently holds $1.1 trillion in United States Treasury securities. That makes them the largest foreign holder of American debt after China. But here is the critical difference. China has been slowly reducing their holdings for years. They have been diversifying away from the dollar. They have been preparing for this moment. But Japan has been loyal. Japan has been the reliable buyer. Japan has been the one propping up the Treasury market even when everyone else was running for the exits. Until now. According to the latest data from the Ministry of Finance in Tokyo, Japanese institutions have sold $47 billion worth of US Treasuries in the last 60 days alone. $47 billion. That is the largest two-month liquidation in the history of the US-Japan financial relationship. And this is just the beginning. This is just the early warning tremor before the big one hits. Because we are not just talking about pension funds making tactical adjustments. We are talking about a structural shift in global capital flows that has been building for 3 decades and is now reversing in real time. Think about what this means for the United States government. Right now, the U.S. is running a fiscal deficit of over $2 trillion per year. That means the Treasury Department has to go into the bond market and borrow $2 trillion every single year just to keep the lights on, just to pay Social Security, just to fund the military, just to service the interest on the existing debt. And who has been buying those bonds? Japan, Europe, China, foreign central banks. But what happens when the largest buyer decides they are done? What happens when Japan says, we need our money back. We need to defend our own currency. We need to take care of our own people. The answer is simple. Interest rates explode. If there are fewer buyers for US Treasury bonds, the price of those bonds goes down. And when bond prices go down, yields go up. It is basic supply and demand. And higher yields mean higher interest rates. Higher interest rates mean the US government has to pay more to borrow money. Higher interest rates mean the deficit gets worse. Higher interest rates mean the debt spiral accelerates. We are looking at a feedback loop that ends in one place: default or hyperinflation. Those are the only 2 options left on the table. But it gets worse because Japan is not just selling US Treasuries. They are also selling everything else. Japanese investors have been the largest foreign buyers of US corporate bonds, US commercial real estate, US equities. They have been funding the American dream for 30 years, and now they are pulling the plug. According to data from Bloomberg, Japanese investors have liquidated over $89 billion in overseas assets in the last quarter alone. They are selling office buildings in New York. They are selling shopping malls in California. They are selling shares of Apple and Microsoft and Tesla. They are taking their chips off the table and going home. And where is that money going? It is going back to Japan. It is going into Japanese government bonds that now actually pay a positive yield. It is going into Japanese real estate. It is going into Japanese stocks. We are witnessing the largest repatriation of capital in modern financial history. And the impact on the US dollar is going to be catastrophic. Because every time a Japanese institution sells a US Treasury bond, they have to convert those dollars back into yen. They have to sell dollars and buy yen. And when you have hundreds of billions of dollars being sold in the foreign exchange market, the value of the dollar collapses. We are already seeing the early signs. The dollar-yen exchange rate has moved from 158 yen per dollar down to 151 yen per dollar in the last 2 weeks. That is a 5% move in 14 days. In the currency market, that is an apocalypse. Currencies are supposed to move in fractions of a percent. They are supposed to be stable. They are supposed to be boring. But the yen just rallied 5% in 2 weeks because the smart money knows what is coming. They know that Japan is about to trigger the mother of all currency interventions. They know that the Bank of Japan is going to have to defend the yen or face complete economic collapse. And here is the part that nobody is talking about. Here is the part that should keep you awake at night. Japan is not the only country in this position. Every major economy in the world has the same problem. They all printed too much money. They all suppressed interest rates for too long. They all built their entire economic model on cheap debt and free money. And now the bill is coming due. Europe is next. The European Central Bank is facing the exact same crisis. They have negative interest rates. They have inflation running at 7%. They have a bond market that is completely broken, and they are going to be forced to make the same decision that Japan just made: stop printing, let rates rise, let the chips fall where they may. And when Europe follows Japan, when the ECB stops buying bonds, the entire global financial system breaks, because there will be nobody left to buy the debt. There will be nobody left to fund the deficits. There will be nobody left to prop up the asset prices. We are looking at a coordinated collapse of every major bond market on the planet. US Treasuries, Japanese government bonds, German bunds, UK gilts, all of them are going to implode at the same time. And when the bond market collapses, everything else collapses with it. Think about what is connected to the bond market. Your pension fund is invested in bonds. Your insurance company holds bonds. Your bank uses bonds as collateral. Your mortgage rate is based on bond yields. Your car loan is based on bond yields. Everything in the financial system is downstream from the bond market. And the bond market is about to have a heart attack. This is not a stock market correction. This is not a recession. This is a complete systemic failure. This is the moment when the debt-based fiat currency system that has been running the world since 1971 finally reaches its mathematical endpoint. And the scariest part? The timeline. We are not talking about something that might happen in 5 years or 10 years. We are talking about a crisis that is unfolding right now in real time. Let me walk you through the death math so you can see exactly how fast this is moving. Right now, the Bank of Japan holds approximately 580 trillion yen worth of Japanese government bonds on their balance sheet. That is roughly 3.8 trillion US dollars. They bought all of those bonds by printing money. They created yen out of thin air and used it to manipulate their own bond market. But now they have announced that they are done. They are not going to buy any more bonds. In fact, they're going to start letting bonds mature and roll off their balance sheet. So what happens to those 580 trillion yen worth of bonds when the central bank is no longer the buyer? Who's going to step in and buy them? Japanese pension funds. They are broke. Japanese banks. They are overleveraged. Japanese insurance companies. They are already insolvent. Foreign investors. Why would anyone buy a Japanese government bond yielding 1.8% when inflation in Japan is running at 4.2%? That is a negative real yield of 2.4%. You are guaranteed to lose money. Nobody in their right mind is going to buy that bond unless they are forced to. And that is the trap. The Japanese government has to issue new bonds every single month to roll over their existing debt. Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of 264%. That is the highest in the developed world. That means the Japanese government owes $264 for every $100 of economic output. It is mathematically impossible to ever pay that back. The only way the system survives is if they can keep borrowing new money to pay off the old money. But if nobody buys the new bonds, the Ponzi scheme collapses. The government defaults. The currency hyperinflates. The entire economy implodes. So the Bank of Japan is stuck. They have two choices. Choice number one, they let interest rates rise to attract real buyers. But if rates rise too high, the Japanese government cannot afford the interest payments. The debt becomes unsustainable. The budget explodes. They have to cut pensions. They have to cut healthcare. They have to slash government spending. And when you do that in an economy that is already shrinking, you trigger a deflationary death spiral. Businesses close, unemployment skyrockets, tax revenues collapse, the deficit gets worse, not better. Choice number two, they go back to printing money. They reverse course. They start buying bonds again to suppress yields. But if they do that, the yen collapses even faster. Inflation spirals out of control. Import prices explode. The Japanese people cannot afford to eat. You get social unrest. You get political chaos. You get a currency crisis that makes the 1997 Asian financial crisis look like a practice run. Either way, Japan loses. There's no good option. There's no escape hatch. They are trapped in a box of their own creation, and the walls are closing in. And here is why this matters to you. Here is why you need to pay attention even if you do not live in Japan, even if you have never bought a Japanese bond, even if you do not care about the yen. Because the global financial system is connected. Everything is connected. When Japan collapses, it does not collapse in isolation. It takes everyone else down with it. Let me explain the chain reaction. Step 1, Japan stops buying US Treasuries and starts selling. Step 2, US Treasury yields spike. Step 3, the US government has to pay higher interest rates on the debt. Step 4, the federal deficit explodes. Step 5, the Federal Reserve is forced to step in and start buying treasuries again to prevent a complete market meltdown. Step 6, the Fed starts printing money. Step 7, the dollar collapses. Step 8, inflation in the United States goes from bad to catastrophic. Step 9, the American people lose faith in the currency. Step 10, the entire system breaks. We are currently somewhere between Step 2 and Step 3. US Treasury yields have already started to rise. The 10-year Treasury yield hit 4.8% last week. That is the highest level since 2007, and it is only going up from here. Because Japan is not the only seller. China is selling. The Middle East is selling. Everyone who holds dollars is looking at the writing on the wall and running for the exits. The great rotation has begun. Capital is flowing out of the United States and into hard assets: gold, silver, real estate, commodities, anything that cannot be printed, anything that has real value. And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. This brings us to the question that you should be asking yourself right now. If the entire global bond market is about to collapse, if the central banks have lost control, if the fiat currency system is entering its terminal phase, where do you put your money? How do you protect yourself? How do you survive what is coming? Because, make no mistake, what is coming is not just a financial crisis. It is a complete restructuring of the global economic order. It is the end of the dollar as the world reserve currency. It is the end of American financial dominance. It is the end of the post-World War II monetary system. We are entering a new era, an era where trust in paper money evaporates, an era where governments are forced to settle their debts in real assets, an era where the difference between physical and paper becomes a matter of survival. And the smart money already knows this. The central banks know this. That is why they have been buying gold. That is why Russia has been buying gold. That is why China has been buying gold. That is why the BRICS nations are building a new monetary system based on commodities instead of fiat currency. They are preparing for the collapse. They are positioning themselves for the reset. And if you are not doing the same, you are going to be left holding worthless paper when the music stops. But to understand the full scope of the disaster, to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, we need to look at the third domino. We need to look at the country that is standing directly in the blast radius of Japan's implosion. We need to talk about South Korea. We need to talk about the export-dependent economy that is about to get obliterated by a strong yen. Because when Japan's currency rises, Korea's competitiveness dies. And when Korea goes down, it takes the entire Asian supply chain with it. Let me explain why South Korea is the canary in the coal mine. South Korea and Japan are direct competitors in almost every major industry: semiconductors, automobiles, electronics, shipbuilding, steel. When the yen is weak, Japanese companies have a massive price advantage. Toyota undercuts Hyundai, Sony undercuts Samsung. Japanese steel floods the global market at prices that Korean producers cannot match. For the last 3 years, South Korea has been winning this war because the yen collapsed. Korean exports have been booming. Korean companies have been stealing market share from their Japanese rivals. The Korean stock market has been on fire. But now the tables are turning. The yen is strengthening. And when the yen strengthens, Korean exports become too expensive. Korean companies lose contracts. Korean factories shut down. Korean workers lose their jobs. We are already seeing the early warning signs. Samsung just announced that their fourth quarter earnings are going to miss expectations by 30%. 30%. They are blaming weak demand, but that is corporate speak for we are getting destroyed by Japanese competition. Hyundai's stock is down 18% in the last month. SK Hynix, the memory chip giant, just announced layoffs of 15,000 workers. The Korean economy is imploding in slow motion. And here is the critical connection. South Korea is the fourth largest holder of US Treasury bonds in the world. They hold over $130 billion in American debt. And just like Japan, they are going to be forced to sell. Because when your export economy collapses, when your trade surplus turns into a trade deficit, when your currency is under attack, you have to defend yourself. You have to sell your foreign reserves. You have to liquidate your treasury holdings. You have to bring the dollars home and convert them into won to stabilize your currency. South Korea is about to become the second domino. And when they start selling, the pressure on US Treasury yields becomes unbearable. But it does not stop there, because South Korea is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The entire Asian export model is based on the same broken system. Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, all of them are running the same playbook. Suppress your currency, make your exports cheap, accumulate dollars, buy US Treasuries, rinse and repeat. It worked for 30 years because the United States was willing to run massive trade deficits. America was willing to be the consumer of last resort. America was willing to print dollars and send them overseas in exchange for cheap goods. But that era is over. The United States is broke. The American consumer is tapped out. Credit card debt just hit $1.2 trillion. Student loan debt is at $1.8 trillion. Mortgage debt is at $12 trillion. The average American household is drowning in debt. They cannot keep spending. They cannot keep buying. And when American consumption slows down, the entire Asian export machine grinds to a halt. And when that machine stops, all of those countries are going to panic, sell their treasury holdings to defend their currencies. We are looking at a coordinated liquidation of US debt by every major economy in Asia. Trillions of dollars flooding into the market at the same time. And who is going to buy it? Who is going to step in and absorb trillions of dollars worth of treasury bonds when the entire world is selling? The Federal Reserve. That is the only answer. The Fed is going to be forced to print money and buy the bonds that nobody else wants. They're going to restart quantitative easing on a scale that makes 2008 look like a warm-up act. We were talking about $5 trillion, $10 trillion, maybe $20 trillion in new money creation. And when that happens, the dollar does not just decline, it collapses. It loses half its value, maybe more. Think about what that means for your life. Think about what happens when the dollar loses 50% of its purchasing power. Gas prices double, food prices double, your rent doubles, your electricity bill doubles, everything you buy is imported. And when the dollar collapses, imports become unaffordable. We are talking about shortages, we are talking about empty shelves, we are talking about lines at the grocery store, we are talking about a standard of living collapse that most Americans cannot even imagine, because we have lived our entire lives in a world where the dollar was king, where we could print money and the rest of the world had to accept it, where we could run deficits forever and nobody could stop us. But that world is ending. Japan just fired the starting gun. They just announced to the entire planet that they are no longer willing to play the game. They are no longer willing to sacrifice their own people to prop up the American empire. And once Japan breaks ranks, everyone else is going to follow. It is going to be a stampede for the exits. And the last person holding dollars is going to be left with nothing but worthless paper and broken promises. So what do you do? What is the move? How do you position yourself in front of a freight train that is moving at terminal velocity? You do not fight it. You do not try to time the market. You do not wait for a pullback that is never going to come. You accept the reality of the situation and you act accordingly. You get out of paper assets, you get out of bonds, you get out of anything that is denominated in a currency that can be printed. You move into hard assets, physical gold, physical silver, real estate in the right locations, productive farmland, energy infrastructure, anything that has intrinsic value, anything that will still exist when the monetary system resets. The window is closing. We are not talking about months. We are talking about weeks. Japan has already made their move. South Korea is next. Europe is right behind them. The dominoes are falling in real time. And by the time the mainstream media admits that there is a crisis, it will be too late. The banks will have frozen withdrawals. The government will have imposed capital controls. The price of physical assets will have already gone parabolic. You will be locked out. You will be trapped in a system that is designed to confiscate your wealth through inflation. This is not a prediction. This is not speculation. This is math. This is cause and effect. Japan cannot print money and stop printing money at the same time. They have to choose. And they just chose. They chose to let the bond market die rather than let their currency die. And that choice is going to trigger a chain reaction that destroys every other bond market on the planet. The United States, Europe, China. All of them are going to face the same impossible decision. And all of them are going to choose to print. Because politicians always choose to print. They always choose to kick the can down the road. They always choose to sacrifice the currency rather than admit that the system is broken. But you do not have to go down with the ship. You do not have to be a victim of central bank policy. You can protect yourself. You can move your wealth into assets that cannot be debased. You can position yourself on the right side of the greatest wealth transfer in human history. Because that is what this is. This is not a crisis. This is a transfer. Wealth is not being destroyed. It is being moved from people who hold paper to people who hold real assets. From people who trust the system to people who understand that the system is a lie. The choice is yours. You can keep your money in the bank and watch it evaporate. You can keep your retirement fund in bonds and watch it implode. You can keep believing that the government is going to fix this. Or you can open your eyes. You can see what is happening in Japan. You can see what is coming to America. You can see the end game, and you can act. The clock is ticking. Japan has begun. The collapse is in motion. And the only question is whether you're going to be ready when it reaches your doorstep. This is Asian Guy. The warning has been given. The data is in front of you. What you do next is going to determine whether you survive what is coming or whether you become another casualty of the greatest financial disaster in modern history. The choice is yours. But the window is closing, and it is closing fast.